The rain had been falling since morning, light, cold, and steady, the kind that clung to your jacket and made the streets feel quieter than usual. Darius had just wrapped up a grueling 12-hour shift. His feet ached, his hoodie was damp, but his spirit? Still intact. Because today was supposed to be the day. After months of saving, skipping takeout, dodging impulse buys, and keeping his budget tight, he was finally ready. Ready to buy the watch he'd been eyeing for almost a year. A silver Omega Seamaster. Classic, sharp, and clean. It wasn't about showing off. It was a reward. A message to himself: you earned this. Downtown, nestled between designer boutiques and private jewelry stores, stood the shop. Darius had walked past it dozens of times, always glancing through the glass, imagining the day he'd finally walk in and point to his watch. Today, he stepped through those tall, spotless glass doors for the first time, and immediately felt like he didn't belong. The place was quiet. Marble floors, glowing display cases, soft jazz playing overhead. Everything smelled faintly of leather and wood polish. But the silence said more than any of that. Behind the counter stood a man, mid-40s, salt and pepper hair slicked back, perfectly tailored suit, and a face that looked like it hadn't smiled in years. The moment their eyes met, Darius saw it. That look. Not curiosity. Not welcome. Suspicion. The salesman glanced at Darius's hoodie, his sneakers, the wet spots on his jeans. Then turned away without a word. Darius hesitated. Maybe he imagined it. Maybe the guy was just having a bad day. He took a few steps forward and cleared his throat. "Excuse me. I'm looking for." "We're closed," the man said sharply, not even turning to face him. Darius blinked, thrown off by the tone. He glanced at the gold-rimmed clock on the wall. 5:13 p.m. The store closed at 6. "The sign says." "I said we're closed," the man repeated, firmer this time. Now Darius knew. It wasn't the time. It was him. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't some celebrity. He was just a young black man alone, walking into a high-end store after a long shift. And that, apparently, was enough to raise alarms. But Darius didn't back down. "I've been saving up for months," he said, steadying his voice. "I'd like to see the Omega Seamaster." Now the man turned around. But not with interest. With amusement. "Oh," he said, slowly walking back to the counter. "That watch." His voice dripped with mock surprise. "That model starts at $7,500. "I know," Darius replied, keeping calm. "I've done my research." The man raised an eyebrow, eyes narrowing as if trying to figure out whether Darius was joking. "Sir," he said with a fake smile, "we have other models more in your price range." It was quiet after that. Too quiet. The words hung in the air like a slap. A woman in the back of the store paused mid-sentence while talking to another associate. A couple nearby looked down, pretending not to listen. But they heard. Everyone did. Darius didn't yell. He didn't storm out. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and opened his banking app. Then, without a word, he held the screen up to the salesman. "Balance, $9,208. "This in my range?" he asked calmly. The salesman stared. His jaw clenched, but he didn't say a word. Just looked away, like the screen burned his eyes. Darius had every right to walk out right then and there. But he didn't. He stood his ground. Because this moment wasn't just about a watch anymore. It was about dignity. But what Darius didn't know was that this wasn't just a one-time case of ugly customer service. No, this boutique had secrets. And by stepping into that store, he had unknowingly started a chain of events that would expose everything. Darius walked away from the boutique, the cool air hitting his face as he stepped into the wet streets. He hadn't bought the watch. Hell, he hadn't even been allowed the chance. He tried to push it out of his mind. After all, he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He could walk into any store, buy whatever he wanted. But as the doors swung closed behind him, Darius felt the sting of the moment. Something wasn't right. He glanced back at the store, the polished glass reflecting his figure, still standing tall in the wet street. His hands slipped into his hoodie pockets, and he let out a long, slow breath. This wasn't just about the watch anymore. The disrespect, the suspicion, the way Thomas had dismissed him. Darius knew he wasn't the first person to face this. But the voice from the back of the store kept echoing in his mind. That deep, gravelly voice. It wasn't just any employee. It wasn't the security manager either. It sounded familiar. Too familiar. As he walked, Darius replayed the conversation over and over in his head. That whispering exchange had planted a seed. The words "call security" lingered like a shadow, but what made him freeze wasn't the threat. It was that second voice. He knew it. He had to know it. Darius pulled out his phone again, scrolling through his contacts. It wasn't a random name he needed to find. It was the name that had haunted him for years. His finger hovered over the screen before he tapped on a recent message from a mutual friend. "Yo, I just heard something about the guy from the boutique you were talking about. Don't go back there." He read it again. A connection clicked. His mind went back to a few months ago, when he had caught wind of a scandal involving one of the city's high-end shops. The whispers were everywhere, the kind of stories you overhear, but don't quite believe. Employees at some of the most expensive stores were allegedly taking advantage of customers, profiling based on appearance, class, and race. People have been speaking out, and while most were brushed off, the evidence was there if you looked hard enough. Darius had dismissed it at the time. He never thought it would hit him. But now, something was telling him to dig deeper. Something was telling him that the man in the back, the voice he knew too well, was tied to it all. A few taps on his phone, and the name appeared. Lenny Hill, his old acquaintance. The same man who had once been a regular at their bar, always giving off an air of entitlement, always acting like he owned the place. He had been known to drop names, flaunt connections, and always treat people below his status with condescension. Darius frowned, eyes narrowing. Lenny Hill. Could it really be him? He thought back to that voice, gruff, authoritative, like it belonged to someone who ran the show. And the way he had spoken, there was a distinct familiarity in how Lenny used to talk when he was in charge. He was a well-connected guy, well-known. But that was the problem. People like Lenny, with their privilege and influence, often use their power to manipulate things behind the scenes. Darius didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. He had to go back. It was a risk, he knew that. But he couldn't let it go. He needed answers. He needed to know why he'd been singled out, why he had been treated like an outsider, despite having every right to be there. And if it was Lenny Hill, he wasn't just going to let it slide. Darius decided to wait a little while before heading back, to give the place time to calm down. He couldn't storm in there with all that tension still hanging in the air. Instead, he decided to go for a walk, to let his mind settle. But the more he thought about it, the more determined he became. He wasn't about to be another person dismissed, another customer who was just overlooked or treated poorly because of how they looked. This was bigger than a watch. This was about standing up to the people who thought they could get away with it. As he walked, Darius felt a surge of resolve. He wasn't just going back for the watch anymore. He was going back to confront the people who thought they could control the narrative. He was going back to expose the truth. The more he thought about it, the more the anger bubbled up inside him. The injustice, the way they assumed he couldn't afford it, the way they judged him. It wasn't just disrespect. It was deliberate. He wasn't just going to walk away from that. And if it was Lenny Hill behind it all, he was going to make sure the truth came to light. Whatever it took. Darius didn't say another word. He lowered his phone, slipped it back into his pocket, and just stared at the man behind the counter. The salesman, clearly uncomfortable now, cleared his throat and shifted his posture. For a moment, he looked like he might actually apologize. But then, "Wait here," the man muttered, vanishing into the back room. Darius stood alone. The boutique was still quiet, but now the tension had a pulse. Every step the salesman had taken echoed like a warning. The couple by the display cases whispered to each other before pretending to be absorbed in a row of diamond watches. The saleswoman in the back gave Darius a quick glance, then turned away. He didn't like the feeling. Not the kind of "you've made it" feeling he had expected when he pictured this moment. No, this was something else. A feeling he'd grown used to over the years, but never numbed to. He exhaled slowly and tried to shake it off. Then he noticed something. The door the salesman had disappeared through didn't close all the way. It bounced gently, left slightly ajar. And through that narrow crack, Darius heard something. A voice? It wasn't the salesman's. This voice was deeper, rougher. "He's still out there?" "Yeah," the salesman replied. "I told him we were closed, but he insisted. You sure he's not casing the place? Darius froze. No, I don't think so. He's got money apparently, the salesman scoffed. Showed me his phone like he was flexing. The other man laughed. Probably photoshopped. I don't trust that for a second. Call security if he lingers too long. We've had issues before. Darius took a step back. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had done everything right. Saved. Worked hard. Walked in with respect. And still this. They weren't just dismissing him. They were treating him like a threat. Like he was a criminal. His fists clenched, then released. His heart pounded, not with fear, but frustration. The salesman reemerged a few seconds later, wearing a forced smile. Apologies for the delay, he said, his tone completely different now. I've pulled the Seamaster from the vault. You still want to see it? Darius said nothing. Just gave a slow, deliberate nod. The salesman opened the display case and set the watch down on a velvet mat. Silver, sleek, shining under the display lights. It was even more beautiful up close. You have excellent taste, the man said smoothly. This piece is... Darius interrupted. What's your name? The salesman hesitated, blinking. Excuse me? I asked for your name, Darius repeated, staring him down. Thomas, the man replied cautiously. Darius nodded again, memorizing the name. Cool. I just want to make sure I remember exactly who helped me today. Thomas laughed nervously. Well, I hope I was able to provide excellent service. You weren't. The air went still again. Thomas cleared his throat and stepped back. Would you like to proceed with the purchase? Darius looked at the watch, then back at the man. I'll think about it. He turned and walked out, leaving the store's heavy glass doors swinging behind him. Outside, the rain had slowed. The streets glistened beneath the city lights. Darius stood under the awning for a moment, breathing deep. But this wasn't over. Not even close. He hadn't come this far to be humiliated and walk away quietly. No, now it was personal. Because the man in the back, the one with the deeper voice, that wasn't just some security manager. Darius had recognized the voice. He just couldn't place it yet. But he would. And when he did, everything would come crashing down. Darius couldn't let it go. It wasn't just the way they had treated him. It was the feeling of being watched, judged, and dismissed without even a second thought. Every step he took back to that boutique felt like a step into an uncharted territory. But the anger that had built up inside him was undeniable. He wasn't about to let anyone get away with this. The store was quieter this time, the rain having cleared up, leaving the streets damp but the air fresh. The sky had softened into a pale blue, and the traffic had lightened. Darius stood outside for a moment, letting the cool breeze settle his thoughts, before he pushed open the glass door again. This time, he wasn't going to let Thomas or anyone else brush him off. The bell above the door jingled, and Darius stepped inside. He was met with a slightly different atmosphere. The store still had its luxury vibe, but the tension from earlier was gone. This time, though, there was no one standing at the counter. He walked further into the boutique, past the rows of pristine watches, and immediately his eyes scanned for the person he was looking for. Lenny Hill. Darius spotted him in the far corner of the store, engaged in a conversation with a woman who appeared to be a regular customer. He was leaning in, hands moving animatedly as he spoke, his face displaying the same condescending smile Darius remembered. The air of superiority was unmistakable. It didn't take much to guess that Lenny was explaining something, probably some story about the watches and their exclusive quality. He was a master of making people feel special, if it benefited him. Darius approached the counter where Thomas stood, his eyes widening when he saw him. You, Thomas stammered, his hand fumbling with a display case key. I didn't expect you to come back. Darius ignored him, keeping his eyes locked on Lenny, who hadn't noticed him yet. He was tempted to walk right up to him and confront him, but something stopped him. Something told him that the right moment wasn't now. Instead, Darius leaned in slightly, just enough for Thomas to hear. I know who that is, Darius said in a low, controlled voice. Thomas froze. He looked over at Lenny and back at Darius. I don't know what you mean. Darius smiled, cold, knowing smile. You know exactly what I mean. Lenny Hill. The man who runs this place, right? The one who's been calling the shots from behind the scenes. Thomas's expression flickered. It was like a light had just gone off in his head. He looked around, as if checking if anyone was listening. But it was just the two of them in the front now. "I don't know what you're talking about," Thomas said, his voice shaking. "Lenny doesn't. I know about the profiling," Darius cut in, his voice sharp. "The way you treat people. I know how you pick and choose who you allow in here based on how they look, how they dress. And I know it's not just me. I know I'm not the first, and I sure as hell won't be the last." Thomas took a step back, but Darius didn't let up. "Don't think I'm the only one who notices, Thomas. You think Lenny's some kind of untouchable god, but he's not. He's just a man using his power to get away with things people like me are supposed to let slide. But I'm not letting it slide anymore." The silence between them felt heavy. Thomas's face went pale. His eyes darted nervously toward Lenny, who was still engaged with the woman across the room. I don't know what you want me to say," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You can start by telling me the truth," Darius replied, his tone steady. "You can start by telling me why people like me get treated like criminals before we even walk in the door." There was a long pause before Thomas spoke again, his voice a little more steady, but his eyes still darting nervously around the room. "Lenny, he's got a lot of connections. More than you know. People like us, we don't get a say in how things go down. We're just following orders." Darius could hear the desperation in Thomas's voice. He wasn't just an accomplice, he was trapped. "You're part of the problem," Darius said flatly. "But I'm giving you a chance to fix it. I'm not walking away this time." At that moment, Lenny turned toward them, his gaze falling on Darius with a smirk spreading across his face. He stood tall, his presence filling the space in a way that made Darius' jaw clench. "Is there a problem here, Thomas?" Lenny asked, his voice smooth but dripping with disdain as he walked toward the counter. Thomas hesitated before replying, clearly unnerved by the situation. "No, Mr. Hill. Everything's fine." Lenny's eyes flicked to Darius, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. "I see we have an eager customer," Lenny said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he eyed Darius up and down. "How's your shopping experience going, my friend?" Darius didn't flinch. He met Lenny's gaze with an intensity that cut through the tension. "I was hoping it would go better," he said coolly. "But then again, it's hard to shop when you're being treated like you don't belong." Lenny's smile faltered for a second, just a second. But in that second, Darius saw the cracks in the facade. He knew something was off, and he wasn't about to let Lenny get away with it. "Let me tell you something, Lenny," Darius said, voice steady. "This ends now." The silence in the boutique was deafening. Darius stood there, facing Lenny, who wore that same smug grin. The kind of grin that told you he thought he was untouchable. Darius wasn't fazed. He had made up his mind. He wasn't backing down. "I'm not here to make small talk, Lenny," Darius said, his voice low but firm. "You know what's been going on. The way people like me get treated. And it's not just me, is it? It's everyone who doesn't fit the image you want in your store. You've been using your influence, your position, to treat people like trash." Lenny's grin faltered for a second, just long enough for Darius to see the glimmer of unease in his eyes. "You don't know what you're talking about," Lenny replied smoothly, but the edge in his voice was clear. "We run a high-end boutique. Not everyone can afford our products, and that's just how it is. We have standards." "Standards?" Darius shot back, his voice sharp. "You mean profiling? You mean using your power to push people out because of the way they look or the color of their skin? That's not a standard, Lenny. That's discrimination." Lenny's eyes narrowed, his body tensing as he stepped closer. But Darius didn't flinch. He had no fear left. He knew what he had to do. "I've been following this place for a while now," Darius continued, his words measured and deliberate. "I've heard the whispers. About the customers you refuse to serve. About the special clientele you cater to. You think you're invisible, but you're not. People are starting to talk, Lenny. And I'm not going to let you get away with it anymore." Lenny's face twisted with anger, his cool facade cracking. "You think anyone's going to believe you? A kid who thinks he can just walk in here and cause trouble." Darius smiled, the fire in his eyes burning brighter. "Oh, I don't need anyone to believe me, Lenny. I've got the evidence." Lenny froze. For a brief moment, his confident, arrogant demeanor slipped. Darius could see the panic rising in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Lenny asked, his voice suddenly laced with tension. Darius reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, unlocking it and tapping through the messages. I've got screenshots, videos, audio clips, all the evidence I need to expose you and your whole operation. Lenny's eyes darted to the phone, then back to Darius. He looked like a cornered animal now, calculating his next move. You wouldn't, Lenny said, his voice shaking with disbelief. You're bluffing. Darius shook his head, still smiling. I'm not bluffing. I've already sent everything to a few trusted people. It's only a matter of time before it gets out. And once it does, your whole little empire will come crashing down. The room felt like it was closing in, the tension thick as the seconds ticked by. You think you can just walk out of here and ruin everything? Lenny sneered, his voice low and dangerous. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Darius didn't back down. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A coward who hides behind his money and connections. But all that doesn't mean a thing when the truth comes out. Lenny's anger was now fully visible. He took a step forward, his hand reaching for something, maybe to grab Darius, maybe to intimidate him. But before he could make a move, Darius stood tall, unwavering. You want to threaten me? Darius asked, his tone icy. Go ahead. But it won't change what's coming. Lenny stopped, his hand hovering in the air, hesitation written all over his face. He was defeated. He knew it. You won't win, Lenny muttered, his voice barely audible. This isn't over. You'll regret this. Darius stood his ground, unfazed. No, Lenny. You will regret this. And with that, Darius turned on his heel and walked out of the boutique. The door closed behind him, the sound of the bell ringing hollow in his ears. He didn't look back. As he stepped into the street, Darius pulled his jacket tighter around him, the weight of what he had just done settling in. But it wasn't fear that weighed him down. It was the knowledge that he had just changed something that had been long overdue. The world outside felt different, lighter, as if a cloud had been lifted. Darius wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew he had done the right thing. He had stood up, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been unfairly treated, dismissed, and overlooked. He wasn't done, not by a long shot. And when the truth finally came out, when the evidence hit the news, and when people started speaking up, Lenny Hill and his corrupt empire would crumble. It was just a matter of time. Darius pulled out his phone again, checking the messages that were already going viral. There was no turning back now. He had started something bigger than himself. And nothing, not even Lenny's threats, would stop it.